We're almost halfway through the year, and a lot of people are running on empty without fully realizing it. Grow Therapy helps you find care that's covered by insurance before burnout becomes the baseline. Whether it's your first time in therapy or your 50th, Grow makes it easier to find a therapist who fits you, not the other way around. They connect you with thousands of independent licensed therapists across the U.S., offering both virtual and in-person sessions, nights and weekends. You can search by what matters, like insurance, specialty, identity, or availability, and get started in as little as 2 days. And if something comes up, you can cancel up to 24 hours in advance at no cost. There are no subscriptions, no long-term commitments. You just pay per session. Grow helps you find therapy on your time. Whatever challenges you're facing, Grow Therapy is here to help. Grow accepts over 100 insurance plans, including Medicaid in some states. Sessions average about $21 with insurance, and some pay as little as $0 depending on their plan. Visit growtherapy.com/booknow to get started. That's growtherapy.com/booknow. growtherapy.com/booknow. Availability and coverage vary by state and insurance plan.
This is Peter.
And this is Tom.
And you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. And hello, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Fresca, and welcome back to the History Teachers Talking Podcast. Tom, how are you doing today?
Not bad. How you doing, Peter?
I'm doing.
Yes.
All right. So today we're going to talk about some weird, bizarre, and revolutionary weapons in American history. I think we're not going to necessarily talk about every weapon. That would be impossible for this medium. Nor are we going to talk about every weapon with regards to every American conflict that the United States has been in. But I think we're going to concentrate on the main three of the biggest wars, casualty-wise, I guess, that the United States has participated in. And the first one we're going to talk about is going to be Civil War. The second is going to be World War I, and then World War II.
Now, remember, these wars were going on, so there's all the research and development was just happening as the war's going on. So that's why you get some of these just crazy concepts. They're trying anything. They're basically, throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. They might not.
And some of it literally,
sense. Yeah, literally, it's like that. And it might not make a lot of sense, but it might have made sense at the time. And and it wasn't just us. Other sides doing the same thing too. It's just kind of like, war really does motivate this type of stuff. So it's just seeing what works, basically.
Yeah. So let's start with Civil War. Let's talk about some weird, bizarre, revolutionary weapons of Civil War.
Well, there's some that worked, some that didn't. I saw one that I found that was pretty different out there. What they were trying to do was trying to get the best of both worlds. It was called the shotgun pistol revolver. Mm-hmm. It was known as the Lamont grape shot revolver. It's like one of these forgotten weapons because it weighed so much. But what it basically was used, it's supposed to be like a wonder weapon of the Confederate Army. The idea is give this to soldiers as they're riding on horseback, and they'll be able to use their revolver. And then when they get closer, it's also a shotgun on the side of it. So she would shoot like a grape shot, a buckshot.
Grape shot. That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
So they figured, why not? Like it was really deadly, and the problem was it wasn't accurate, mostly because it was a revolver, and it weighed so much. It weighed over 5 pounds fully loaded, which is a lot to just have in your hand and try to aim while you're riding on a horseback. So most soldiers just kind of threw it, didn't even use it as time went on, and just rather I'll just carry 2 pistols instead of having this. Yeah. So it didn't really work because it was just too heavy, but it was considered very deadly, and it was really pushed aside for the Colt revolver that comes out a little bit later and it becomes infamous.
Yep. Actually, the Colt revolver, one of the more famous ones was the Colt Patterson, which was built in New Jersey. The good old Patterson. Another one that I kind of found interesting from the Civil War, I don't know if you found that in your research, was the Colt torpedo.
Yes.
So essentially, it was like a hollow iron casting that was covered with coal dust and filled with explosives. So it was like a grenade that looked like coal. Mm-hmm. And it was conceived by Thomas Courtenay of the Confederate Secret Service. And it was designed as an explosive that was meant to be hidden in enemy coal piles for trains and steamships. So the idea was that when they were shoveling coal into the boilers, the torpedoes would then explode, destroying, killing, and sinking anything that they touched. And we don't really know how many times this was successful, mainly because the Union Army discovered this plot by capturing a rebel courier.
Like a spy, right?
He had them with him. But there are reports in history that some of these bombs actually did make their way onto specifically ships, steamboats, and steamships. So I thought that was kind of like a cool Secret Service weapon, designed by
Yeah, kind of like that,
the Confederates.
James Bond type stuff, right? The little
Yep.
hidden and see what happens type of thing. Yeah, and they call it a torpedo just because that's what they called anything that exploded back then. That's what they
Yep.
called. If it exploded, it was called a torpedo. Even though it looks like it's like a hand grenade. Yeah, but again, this is that mother necessity, right? Necessity, is creating these new ideas. So they're saying, the union is like this big powerhouse where they have more industry, they have more railroads and everything like that. And the Confederates is trying to find something that can kind of even the score. So they're going to use these more
Like homemade
what's
almost.
the word? Yeah, homemade. Also, what was I trying like hidden
Like
tactics?
they're
You know?
amateur. Yeah, they're kind of
Yeah,
amateur weapons.
we would
Yeah.
call it like guerrilla warfare. Basically, that's what they're
Yep.
basically trying to do.
Indeed. I think we should also talk about, probably the most famous odd weapon, specifically for the time, bizarre, weird, revolutionary weapon, and that was the submarine.
Yeah, the Hunley, right?
Right.
That's what you're looking
Yeah,
at.
the Hunley. So the Hunley, it holds the distinction for being the very first submarine to take down a ship. It was a tiny crew. They kind of sat inside this thing. It was almost a death wish in itself. And wasn't it like a hand crank?
It was cranked, yeah, hand cranked, and it was just. It
Yeah.
didn't have like torpedoes. It didn't shoot anything. It was like like a giant spear, like where there's like a explosive on the end of it that's supposed to like ram into a ship, and then it would like they would back up, and the explosive would supposedly stay.
Yeah. Rocky's, if you think about it, not think about it, if you read about it, you realize that it sank a lot.
Yeah. Well, I was reading
um,
that the Confederates sank it once because they forgot to close the hatches when they went underwater with it when they launched
yeah,
it.
smart.
So that
Good
was the
call there.
first thing. Like, oh man, we didn't close the door. Like, well, yeah, like that's not. It's like having a screen door on a submarine. It's not a good idea.
Yeah, it also said that it killed 12 people before it was ever successfully used in
Okay.
war. So, good luck there, right?
Yeah, that definitely had its
Um,
problems.
and actually, its first attack was its only attack. When it rammed the spear into USS Housatonic, I think.
Yeah.
It was part of a naval blockade in Charleston, North Carolina. So the Housatonic sank, killed 5 crewmen, but then the Hunley never really returned to base because it also sank for the third time in its short history
They
and
think it
killed its
probably just
entire
never
crew.
got. It probably just got stuck, and then the bomb went off. The explosive went off when they were still stuck into the Housatonic, basically.
Yep. And I'm pretty sure that they found the Hunley not that long ago.
They find. Yeah, I remember seeing that, hearing that years ago. They did find parts of it, or
Something like that. I
it
think,
was.
yeah, I think they took it out.
That was always. Yeah, I'm sorry. That was always what they thought it blew up getting stuck, but it actually proved when they found it that it did leave it, but it got like damaged in the explosion. It was probably taken on water,
Yep.
and that's what sunk it. And then the crew obviously didn't make it out. So
And then another thing that is definitely, I would say, not really weird or bizarre, but revolutionary when it comes to weaponry in the Civil War is obviously the Gatling gun.
mhm.
There's a
Well,
couple interesting things about the Gatling gun. I mean, Tom, you want to kind of get into it a little bit?
well, obviously the Gatling gun, it's giving you like more bang for your buck about it. Basically, right? It's one of those big repeating rifles, right? It really used in Civil War. It's kind of like a prelude, like the great grandfather or grandfather to the machine gun, I guess you would say, right? That you see later on
Yep.
in World War One. Especially for
Yep.
frontline troops, because now they could just load these things, and all they needed to do to get a shot off was really just pump it. And the same guy who made the Gatling gun used to also make circus rides. He just made the Gatling gun and make money. He was like,
Yep.
what's one way I can make a lot of money? Well, there's war, so if I make something that makes killing easier, I can make a lot of money. And that was basically the idea. Nothing was more deadly than the Gatling gun. I believe most of the deaths probably in the Civil War were results of injuries or from the Gatling gun. And it
Did
just
you know
it changed warfare. It made
absolutely,
linear warfare impossible.
absolutely. And did you know that it actually was not officially adapted by the U.S. Army and military until 1866, after the war was already over?
Yeah, I was reading like a lot of generals actually bought them privately. Like they just
Yeah,
owned
with
them.
their own money and
They
just
just
dragged
bought
them to
it.
the
Like,
front line.
let me just have this. Yeah, and they're like, oh man, the war's coming out now. I have these Gatling guns. I can use them. And then it's kind of
Yeah,
crazy.
so it was like someone's private
Yeah.
gun.
Second Amendment. I'm sorry.
Second Amendment. That's right. Because you're looking at this idea that technically the army didn't have it official until after the war was already over. A couple other things. I guess one we probably should talk about is the balloon corps.
Yes, I saw. I was reading. I remember seeing that and hearing about that, and also finding it in some of the research. Also, yeah,
Yeah, and then for the most part, I mean, they were reconnaissance. The balloons were meant for reconnaissance. But once they got up there, they started throwing things down. Where there was rocks or bricks or anything along those lines.
yeah,
And there really wasn't any risk being shot down because primarily the Civil War era rifle just couldn't, really be that effective in hitting a
no,
target that far away.
yeah.
I mean, they could hardly hit a target in front of them. Whoever was in the balloon corps was kind of treated more like a joke, even at the time. They weren't really treated as military personnel.
They run really until like the First World War, and in the First World War too. That's what those early pilots did before they started mounting the machine guns. They would just like drop like hooks, right, bricks, bombs,
Yep.
anything on the enemy trenches. It was just one of these things. I know the military doesn't fully develop a official balloon air corps until 1893
Yep.
in
Fort
Kansas.
Riley,
Yeah,
Kansas.
Fort
Yep.
Riley. That's right. So it takes a while before they're actually like seen and used like all the time, but they are used in the early parts of the war. I remember in that Ken's Burn documentary, he had a little bit about them. Remember that old Ken Burns
Yep.
documentary,
Yep.
Civil
Yep.
War? I know he talks about like the balloon corps a little bit and stuff like that. So they get like referenced, but they're not really talked about as much as probably maybe they should. It's an interesting story. Maybe that's something that we can do in a future podcast. Look into these like unsung heroes of some of these wars, something like the balloon corps and stuff like that. Because there's really,
Yep.
I'm sure there's a lot of information out there on them themselves.
Do you have anything else before we hop on to World War One?
So again, this war was just such a brutal war. I saw things like the double cannon, right? I'm sure you saw that. Like it was just a cannon. This looked like a two
Well, that
cannon.
was still Civil War. Yeah, Civil War is
Yeah,
called double cannon.
Civil War
Yeah,
double
it was
cannon. Just
supposed to have. It was connected. It was connected by a chain, right?
yeah,
And there was supposed to. The idea was both supposed to fire at the same time. The two cannonballs were connected by this chain, and they were supposed to just go swinging and just wiping everything out.
wipe out. Yeah, they would do that. I know I know the Confederates had their sub. We and the North had a sub too. They used the Alligator. I remember seeing that a little bit. But again, I think that for Civil War, like we were saying, they're just putting these weapons out there and seeing what they can work. There's a lot of pike
Yeah.
weapons and stuff like that because it's still a lot of hand to hand combat.
And that's
So
when
those sorts of
World
things.
War One kind of gets. This one's definitely a trench war, and you
Yes.
could tell that just based on the type of weapons that were very much suited, created, some very bizarre, very weird, and some really revolutionary for the future that came out of World War One. So let's kind of jump into World War One, Tom.
Well, one thing, obviously, trench warfare comes, into play big time in World War One. So one thing that both sides were trying to kind of figure out was before the tank comes, that kind of like changes. That's obviously revolutionary, right? Breaks the trench warfare and stuff like
Yeah,
that. But one of the things I found that I always go over in my classes were the fake trees. I'm sure you
I
saw this,
love the fake trees.
right? The fake
I
trees
love
and
that.
the fake trees. Something they actually were like really effective too. Like
They
they were
said they were
just
very effective. Yeah.
yeah, they looked like trees. They were like hollowed out, camouflage, and they would just like put them up at night. So a lot of times, if people didn't realize what the landscape was, oh, there was a tree there, or they would actually just like uproot a tree or move a tree and put them next to them and stuff
And
like
that's what
that.
gets me because it was always put in no man's land, right? And they always
Yeah,
did it at night. So it was basically like a fake tree. It was made out of canvas and chicken wire,
yeah,
and they would put a sniper in it, and they would set this tree up in the middle of no man's land in the middle of the night. And like you said, in the morning, the sun would come up, and someone's looking through the binoculars, and they're like, "Oh, a tree. Okay, I guess there's a tree there," not knowing that there was a sniper in there, and that wasn't a real tree. But at the same time, wouldn't it be weird though? Like, hey, everything's destroyed in no man's land, but there's a
there's
tree.
a tree. Yeah, and imagine being that guy sitting in there, like you're
Yeah,
just
I know,
sitting
right?
in this like it's a canvas and chicken wire tree, where like
Yeah.
you're in no man's land. Anyone else, if you're going to be killed as soon as they figure out that there's a sniper in there. I mean, that's just got
Yeah.
to be crazy.
Yeah, and they would leave you there for the whole day. So
You're
because they
there.
didn't
You're
want
there.
that,
You're there the whole day. Yeah, because no one's
you
going to
were
get
there
you.
24
Yeah,
hours
yeah.
inside this
No one's there
fake
to get
tree
you.
as like a lookout or a sniper. Yeah. I thought that was really cool too. I remember the first time I kind of learned this years ago, I was like, I would not want to be that guy. I mean,
No.
kind of again, going with this idea of trench to trench and also no man's land, you have a lot of like hand weapons
Oh
in
yeah.
case you make it into a trench and or someone makes it to your trench.
But they're like
Uh,
medieval.
one- yeah, very medieval. Like one of them that really kind of stands out to me is the Gauntlet Dagger.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever seen Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee in the 70s, where you have the one bad guy, the villain that kind of switches on these fake hands and he's got like one of them I think was like gauntlet dagger. It also reminds me of like RoboCop. When he like did that thing with his hand and like this dagger shot out.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
basically what this looked like.
And you would use it
This was
just
like
to pierce, to go through, like like someone's helmet. You're jumping down into the trench. We ever see a trench knife? Like that's
I
basically the
did
same
see
thing
yeah.
too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
But
what
this was
they actually
attached to like
used.
a glove.
Yeah,
It was like a fisted glove. Literally, it was like a
metal
fisted
armor.
glove.
Yeah, metal armor glove. Yeah.
Metal armor fist. And you would put your fist into this metal armor fist that had this dagger sticking out of it.
Yeah.
And you literally would just jump into, what do you
The
call it?
trench and just start swinging.
Just start swinging. Or just
stabbing.
stabbing, really. Just
Yeah,
stabbing
It
people.
can be very brutal.
I thought that was
yeah,
insane.
just like you said, it's very similar, like from the Enter the Dragon era. I mean, it reminded me that my father made my wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, but made my future wife sit and watch that movie with him.
It's actually not a bad movie.
And Enter the Dragon. Yeah, but I
know, but that's something like not something you want to do.
It's not really her type of movie. But yeah, I just remember that. Yeah,
it's a great movie. That was actually developed by the British and the French. This gauntlet dagger, but going along with these like trench, warfare, you have a lot of the trench clubs.
Yeah, the clubs a lot of times were just they find big sticks and just put nails in it.
Yeah, like this is like Walking Dead style.
Yeah, Walking Dead. That's what I was thinking. This is like zombie. These weapons look like they would work really well in like the zombie apocalypse.
Absolutely, weighed with lead, fitted with iron spikes. And they said that like sometimes they called it like officer's walking stick. And they look different for each of the nations. But the French had them, the Germans had them, the British had them. They were basically like baseball bats with
blunt
spikes.
Objects made to kill.
Crazy.
Well, especially when this is supposed to be like a first modern war, right? Like you're using airplanes, they're using, like machine guns and stuff like that, poison gas. But when it comes down to it, they're still just using sticks to just like wipe each other out.
And something you alluded to before, when World War I becomes the real first aerial war, and at first planes, just like balloons, were being used as reconnaissance. So as planes were going up, sometimes the pilots were like, let me bring a couple stones and rocks with me. I'll drop them on the other side. And then they were like, let me bring some bricks. And then it was, let me bring some dynamite. But then the opposing side would also get up there with their own planes. So they're like, let me bring a gun. So they started, bringing pistols. But they're like, let me bring a machine gun. And then eventually they figured out how to mount a machine gun. And it was just like an evolution, all within just the period of this one world war. But one thing that was I found to be kind of a bizarre weapon. I don't know if you saw this, the aerial darts.
Yes, I saw those. Yeah. Basically like giant lawn darts. If you guys see the game Lawn Darts, these just giant metal darts they would drop, from the plane.
Oh, they would drop them from the plane.
Yeah.
And they said that essentially these darts with feathers behind them, so they would always go straight down super fast. They would drop them from the aircraft onto troops and cavalry formations below. And it was super silent. As they dropped, you wouldn't know that there was this dart that was big dropping at you. They said it would pierce helmets. It would just, kill people, go through their heads. Insane stuff. I thought it was kind of a bizarre weapon.
Well, they also used to just take giant hooks, and like a giant like fish hook, and they would just like drop that, pull it as the plane flew, like right through the trench. And again, even if that doesn't kill you, obviously that could kill you, but if that just comes in like gashes and gives you like a gash on your arm, on your torso or something, that's going to get infected instantly in those trenches.
A couple other odd things that came out here, again, stemming from trench warfare and not wanting to kind of stick your head out because, you'd be dead. You probably saw this too, the periscope rifle, right? So you had allowed a soldier essentially to take aim from trenches. It was like a wire connected to the trigger, and then there was a mirror which looked
over it. Yeah, it sounds
reflected.
It looked exactly like how it sounds, basically.
Yeah, it was a periscope rifle. And then there was the grenade catapult that was created by the British, and then the grenade crossbow that was perfected from the catapult by the French. That was kind of interesting too.
Yeah,
as opposed to throwing the grenades. Yeah,
just to get a little bit farther, right? Like anything that just
that's all it was.
Get them down there, get them farther, and because hopefully you want to get farther away. This way, shoot the grenade, a few feet farther, and then get them. That's basically what they're trying to do there.
Yeah, and the French crossbow looked kind of cool. I mean, it was big. It wasn't like a hand crossbow.
Yeah,
it was kind of a big crossbow. It was spring loaded, and same thing. You put a grenade in it, just go. It was kind of crazy. And then there's a few things that were not necessarily weapons, but I thought they were interesting. But one was an anti-gas fan. Did you see that?
Yeah, it's just basically a bunch of fans.
literally like a
Yeah,
fan. Like
like a giant, like what
they're
you would see in like those like old like Egyptian movies, right? Like the fan, the pharaoh, and
yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah.
Yeah,
They gave to the British soldiers, like they gave out like 100,000 of these, right? To British soldiers, like this anti-gas fan. So they're like, if you see a weird color or a fog coming towards you, it might be mustard gas or any some form of gas. So what you need to do is you need to stand there and literally fan it away from yourself. It's so not. I mean, I don't want to say funny because I don't want to be that guy that has mustard gas coming
yeah,
at
but
him
also who's
as
going to
he's
stay?
trying to
I
fan
mean, I
it
know
away.
this is before like before they had the gas mask, obviously, but like
Yeah.
you're just going to stand there and let this envelop you. Like there's no way you're going to be pushing like that gas away. Even if you
Oh,
push the one right in front of you a little bit, it's not going to be enough to keep it from surrounding you.
oh,
It's just one of
absolutely.
these concepts like, oh, this is gas. We'll just fan it away. It's not that simple. As
Yeah.
again, they
No
just like
way.
they just let's just manufacture it, get it out there. It also probably made the troops, feel like I'm not worried about gas because we have our gas fans. So if they do attack, we can just fan it back at them. It's like, yeah, no,
Craziness.
but
A couple of things that were odd from World War One. One was spy pigeons.
I did
So
see that.
obviously, pigeons were being used in World War One as a means of what's the word I'm looking
Communications,
for?
yeah,
Communications.
communications.
Absolutely. But the spy pigeons, again, kind of ahead of its time. So the Germans thought of this, and what they did is they created a very small time delay camera that had kind of like a trigger on it through time delay it would just take pictures every like few minutes, and they would mount these on like a little small tiny harness on these pigeons, and it would send these pigeons out to take pictures. I thought that was kind of cool.
Well, yeah,
And
again,
then
it's like a drone, like how they would use
that's
drones
what it was. It's like a
or
first
satellites
drone,
now, but they don't have that technology. Let's just strap something to these birds and see what happens.
Absolutely. And then another thing that I also found that was kind of funny, I guess. As the war was starting, they came out with British but like bicycle battalions. Did you
Hmm.
see that?
I did
There
see
was a
some. I remember.
Kent Cyclist Battalion. It was touted as like the new form of cavalry before the war started. They're like, oh, horses are going to be obsolete. The bicycle is going to really be the new cavalry. And then trench warfare happened, and that was the end of the bicycle
Yeah, because that's not going to work.
cavalry. Although in World War II, when they were dropping parachuting people behind enemy lines, they would often parachute them with like these. They talk about, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself, but they would drop them with these kind of odd little tiny bicycles that they would click in and put together, which is kind of cool.
But there's a lot
So
of you're talking about those. There's also a lot of like defensive weapons they try to do. I don't know if you saw some of those, but
yeah,
the one that I found that was just the most odd um, was the Brewster's body shield. So if you're at home looking, if you have like a few minutes if you're bored one day, just look up a picture of the Brewster body shield, and you think it has to be made up. It almost looks like one of those like emoji faces on it, but it's like this body armor that the soldiers would wear, and it would repel like some rifle fire, but it was just so cumbersome and so heavy, and also left you totally exposed in some other areas. Um, but again, it's just a
yeah,
way. It's like the bulletproof one. We're immune. But yeah, even though the bullets aren't piercing the armor, you're not going to be able to move, and the force of the bullet is still going to knock you over, and then a mortar's going to come, and you can't walk anyway. So it just but just how it looks like comical. It's how like these are like flaps that covered like on the top where the eyes would be and stuff like that, like the cutout where you could see from almost looks like a mouth. It's just I don't know how they thought that was going to be a good idea and how that was going to work, but it was like the beginning of body armor. You having these new
yeah.
machine guns, I need something to protect from it.
Definitely not Kevlar. Not
No,
yet.
no,
Not yet.
it's not there.
Do you have anything else for World War One before we jump into
I
the
mean,
the big
there's
one
a ton
here?
of World War One, but I want to get into World War Two because World War Two has the stuff that
Some of it's odd, some of it failed, and some was really revolutionary and stuck around. And I think World War II weapons is really kind of the premise of this episode. I think the
yeah.
World
So
War One
originally we
and
were going to make
Civil
it
War
just
was,
World War Two, but we
yeah.
decided to add a few
We
other
figured
things.
we'll give it a little intro to it, yeah,
A
with the
little
other
intro
wars.
just to see
But
that it wasn't the only war this happened in. Yeah.
all right, let's talk about some World War II stuff. And again, Tom and I don't share our notes prior to this, nor do we share our research. So we really are talking about this for the first time right now. Every time you guys hear us, so with that in mind, what do you got for me, Tom?
Well, let's start off. I'm going to start off with probably it's one of my favorite ones. So I'm just going outright for it. I've seen it. I saw it on a bunch of when I was doing research, but I knew about it from years ago. And I even talk about this one with my students when I used to teach World War II. So I just thought it was interesting. So we all know that the United States was developing You had the Manhattan Project, which in its own right, you can say that was a weird weapon, right? The atomic bomb. Was it going to work? Was it wasn't? But they were also planning other ways, right? So one of these crazy things that they were developing was actually called the bat bombs. And what it was they were and it was in development, like it was in practical development. They were going to use it. So the atomic bomb kind of said, "Oh, we don't need to use this weapon anymore." But it was a way to try to end the war in Japan. And the plan was that they round up hundreds of thousands of bats, and they would take all these bats and put them in a canister, and on each bat was like a little like vest. And the plan was you drop these bats over Japan during the day. And what's going to happen is, or in twilight, the bats, because they're nocturnal, are going to find a dark spot. And how most Japanese architecture was like those like curved up awnings. So the idea was the bats would go underneath those and like just like, grab on, perch onto there. And then the timer on their vest would go off and the bat would be covered in like a napalm type substance and basically start spreading fire everywhere. Because, you set an animal on fire. Don't do that at home, obviously. Hopefully.
Indeed.
You guys aren't like, John Wayne Gacy's over there, right? But like, the bat goes on fire, it's going to flip out, it's going to be flying all over the place. And the idea is it's going to spread the fire, it's going to burn down all the Japanese houses and industry and stuff like that. And it's going to burn down the Japanese cities. And that was the plan. The big problem, why it was what they were trying to figure out was when the bombers flew at very high altitude, the bats would freeze. So they would drop them, they wouldn't like unfreeze in time to fly to where they wanted to go. It worked fine in field tests when they practiced it, but actually in like the actual flying that height and dropping them, it was pretty unsuccessful. But it would have worked theoretically, just having the bats there. They were going to set on fire, burn down the Japanese cities. But the atomic bomb was further along, so they just kind of scrapped the project after they knew the Manhattan Project worked in July of '45. I thought that was crazy. Bats could have ended the war.
Going along with animals. The Russian suicide bomb dogs.
Yes, those dogs. Yeah.
Yeah. So what they would do is the Russians, specifically right after the Germans, invaded
Stalingrad.
Soviet
This is
Union.
like Stalingrad, Leningrad type stuff. Yeah.
So what they did is they basically trained these dogs. They starved these dogs, and then they attached explosives to them. And then what they would do is they would train them by putting meat underneath tanks. So after they would release these starved dogs, they would run under a tank, and they kept on training them that way. So that way, once they were in battle, they would release them, and these dogs would run under German tanks, and that's when they would detonate. So the way they trained them is once they were underneath the tank, they actually were kind of instructed and conditioned to pull out the detonator cord. And only then they would receive some food. So they would literally like pull their own trigger, you might say.
Yeah.
But the problem was that once the battle started and it was extremely loud, the dogs just kind of couldn't execute the task. They're kind of freaked out. And they would often turn around and run towards the Russian handler. You know what I mean?
They want to help. They're like, because they were like freaked out by the noise in the battle. Remember, the battles weren't actually going on with a field test. And the dogs might have been hungry, but they'd rather live than be hungry.
Exactly. And, sadly, as soon as they ran back, they were often shot and killed right on sight because there was a fear that they were going to run back with that explosive. So, again, kind of sad. But there's one other story that's very bizarre from World War II that also deals with animals. You probably heard this. Again, it's kind of a famous story for my fellow Polish people out there. Have you ever heard of Wojtek the bear?
I remember you telling me about him. I know you were talking about some of the pigeon-guided missiles, which we can talk about later. Next one.
But let's
I remember this in one of our chats. Yeah, and I remember reading about it too. Yeah. It's
Wojtek the bear. So it's the British. So British soldiers were given a baby cub bear. Beginning of the war. And they didn't know what to do with this little cub. So they gave it to a Polish artillery corps that was part of the British Army. And this Polish corps started to feed this bear milk and eventually a little bit of vodka. And then the treat was cigarettes and beer. The bear, I actually got the bear to smoke cigarettes and drink beer. And that was like his treat. And they taught him how to salute on command and how to get on his, two hind legs. And again, they literally turned him into like a little pet. Now, when they were moving, in order to move, when they were going to invasion of Sicily and then Italy, they wouldn't let any corps bring a pet. So what the Polish artillery corps did is they actually drafted him as a private. So therefore, they gave him like a pay book, and he got a rank. And they brought him with him to invasion of Italy. During the Battle of Monte Cassino in Italy, they would bring him out to where they were shelling the Germans, and the bear would just kind of watch what they were doing. And before you know it, he started carrying crates of ammo, just like the soldiers kept on bringing the crates of ammo and carrying them well to the cannons. He started doing that. So throughout the entire battle, he just literally brought over more and more ammo. And then when the war ended, that entire unit was brought back to Scotland. They all disbanded, and he lived in a zoo until 1963 when he passed away at the age of 21. And they said even in his 60s, he still always loved people, wave at people, and always wanted beer. Which I thought is kind of a crazy, bizarre
He was
story.
remembering his war days, you know.
Yeah, I think it's a crazy story.
One of those stories that just like, kind of gets lost in the history books. That's not
Yeah.
stuff that the history books are necessarily going to talk about, but it makes the not only more interesting, I think it also makes the war, like these stories, more human. Like what these soldiers were doing to just try to pass the time and stay sane themselves. Get their mind
Yeah.
off of like what's going on around them. They raise this bear. Why not? It's just crazy
No,
enough that we're fighting
it's
this
nuts.
war. Raising a bear is giving a bear beer is nothing compared to fighting in this war.
So what do you got? What else you got?
Well, there's a whole bunch of other ones. I kind of talked about it a few minutes ago, but it was actually like we know that the Japanese had like the suicide bombers, right? And the most famous type of like the kamikazes, but you also had the ones called the oka, which is in Japanese actually means like death blossom, but in the Americans call it the baka, which meant idiot in Japanese, because what it basically was it would be dropped from a plane, and it was a three-stage rocket. And it was made to fly. A person would be flying. It was a kamikaze rocket-powered missile, person-powered missile, basically, and it would fly into U.S. ships to try to take them down, or fly into bomber formations to try to blow them all up. It had a few minor successes, but it had a little impact on the war. By that point, there was nothing the Japanese, could do. And but it kind of showed their how desperate they were. We also had something similar to us and the British were working on also our own kind of like guided missile system, but we weren't putting people inside. We were putting a pigeon inside. And how it
Mm-hmm.
worked was you fire this projectile at like a ship, and how they train these pigeons is they would have an image of a ship in front of them, and then it would go away obviously as the missile kind of like swayed. So they would have to like peck on like a little pad, and the pad would like adjust the rudders on the missile, like they make it go left and right and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. And more food would come out as long as the ship image was like right in front of them. So that's how they got trained. So the idea was you shoot at a ship, and they can look through a little window, and they're going to see the ship. And they don't see the ship anymore. They're veering off course of the ship. They're going to peck at the window to get more food to come out. So as they're getting the more food, and as they're pecking at the window, it becomes more straight, and then just flies into the ship. So we were willing to sacrifice pigeons to that was kind of like that was going to be those were the first guided missile systems basically for the U.S. and the British Navy. Never really put into combat because it turns out like same thing. In field tests, it might work, but then in actual combat with all the other things going on, the pigeons kind of got more freaked out with like surviving than just pecking to get a couple, get some food.
Wow.
But again, using animals is kind of like the computer chips. That's kind of how I
Yeah.
see it. It's like the drones.
Wow.
So those sorts of things.
Did you ever read about the British aerial minefield?
No, that one I haven't heard of.
So the British created this projectile rocket launcher that they put on their ships, and it was kind of like a initial first anti-aircraft measure. What it would do is, I guess the premise was to kind of protect them from any enemy planes above them. So what it would do is this rocket launcher would shoot this projectile, fire it right up from a ship, and then once it reached about 1,000 feet in elevation, it would explode and disperse these little mines that were attached to these little tiny parachutes. It's kind of insane. And then these mines were all, and the parachutes were actually connected by these little thin wires. So it created like
Wow.
like a minefield. You know what I mean? The problem was that it was very much visible by the pilots. So once the German pilots were aware that there's this aerial minefield, they kind of just avoided it and flew past it. And often they would just never really detonate. They would just kind of be at the mercy of the wind and eventually just slowly flow down and get back into the British ships that fired them, which again, there's no records ever of this being successful, but they did try to create this anti-aircraft minefield, aerial minefield, which I thought was kind of a cool failed weapon of World War II.
Well, another one that kind of goes with that, again, it's trying to piece air power is such a major component, right, in World War II, right? It's a major, it's used in a bunch of different ways, just devastating cities. That's why you have so many more civilian casualties in World War II, is basically because of the aircraft, right? So that was with the British making that whole thing. And I saw one of the German anti-aircraft weapons that Hitler wanted to use was actually, it was called Hitler's wind cannon. If you saw this one. And they actually built it. It was actually managed to create it. And the Nazis were famous for like making these those super weapons, these massive things. Remember like that Big Bertha gun and all these rail
Oh, the
guns
Big
and
Bertha
stuff
gun,
like
yeah.
that. And in World War One they had the Paris gun, like these massive, massive things. They didn't realize all that resource and manpower to make that one. We're better off making like a couple hundred of something that was more effective. But they did actually manage to create this wind cannon, and the whole idea was it was used like this chemical explosive, and it would launch this massive gust of air and water vapor into the sky, and it would create like severe turbulence. And the idea was that it would, knock out enemy aircraft just in the sky, just by making these bursts of turbulence to knock them down. And he hoped that it would, be used to destroy the Allied heavy bombers. It just the war ended before it could ever actually be used. It was able to knock out wooden planes very easily, and they believe if they made a higher charge, it could knock out like the metal planes and stuff. But the war ended before it was actually put into actual service. They just had like the prototypes and stuff like that. But I thought it was an interesting way. Let's use wind to kind of like knock down these planes. Anyway,
It's like the Germans were definitely ahead of their time when it comes to. I think that's also why they have a decent amount of failed weapons, because they also have
they
the
were
most
trying so many
probably
things. And you
trying
have
so
to
much.
remember
Yeah,
too, they were fighting, and we are not supporting the Germans in any way in World War II,
no,
but they're
by any
fighting
means.
they're fighting the larger armies, right? They're worried about a two front war, especially in 1941 when the United States gets involved. Right, everything starts to turn on them. They need these super weapons. That's what Hitler really thought. Hitler thought these super weapons were going to be what was going to like win him, because he had success with the V1 and V2 rockets, which I'm sure we can talk about. Right, they were planning
Yeah,
their own atomic bomb projects. Like they had these super weapons already. They had the first operational jets with the Messerschmitts.
yeah.
So they had those things, and the rocket comet we can talk about, but it's those sorts of weapons. So they definitely had success with a lot of these weapons. So we thought, hey, every one of these weapons is going to be a success. That was their plan.
Yeah. Other German thing that it actually didn't really fail. It just, I guess, arrived a little too late. Did you ever read or see anything about the little remote controlled demolition tanks that the Germans made?
Yeah, I remember hearing about them. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Americans called them doodle bugs.
Yes.
It was called, essentially, it was really called the Goliath. There were these little tiny tanks, and they were radio controlled. And at first, they were actually, it was a wire attached to it. Before, towards the end of the war, by like 45, the Germans finally figured out how to make it radio controlled. But these were like the very first like radio controlled weaponry. So these little tanks with a joystick, they would run on a joystick, were operated by this controller guy that was however many feet away or yards away. And then what he would do is, I think the cable they said was over 2,000 feet long to the back of the controller. And this mini tank
Mm-hmm.
was powered by these two electric motors, eventually replaced by gas burners. It was about the size of, I would say, your standard good old lawnmower, without the handle, because it was low to the ground. It would essentially go underneath, whether it was a truck or another tank, and it would blow up. And eventually, the Americans and the British and the French kind of figured it out what it was, and they started cutting those
Those wires when they
cords,
found them and
the
stuff.
wires, yeah. And that's what kind of brought Germany to really perfect the radio controlled models. And they did. So there's about 7,500 Goliaths that were built during the war, which kind of suggests that they actually did meet with some success, considering that they built so many of them. I thought that was a kind of a cool weapon.
That's what we use today. Like that's a drone. Like that's what we would call
Basically,
it
yeah,
today. When you have the guys find the drones from like a base in Nevada, and they're over in the Middle East doing what they're
yeah.
doing. So you have a
And
whole
I'm
bunch.
kind of, it's we. I'm sorry, I'm skipping, but there's one other thing when you talk about this wind cannon. There's just one other. It was a failed weapon. That's probably why I forgot about it that much. But do you remember where the Japanese would set up these explosives during World War II, and they would put them on these balloons, and they kind of hoped that these balloons were going to
Well,
just the
yeah.
wind is
So,
going to take them
well,
and
what they
carry them in a
discovered
jet
was
stream.
Yeah, they discovered the jet stream. The Japanese,
Yep.
the Western world had no idea about the jet stream. The Japanese discover it, so they figured we take these weather balloons and strap explosives on it, these incendiary bombs. And
Yep.
what their plan was that they were going to release them. They would follow the jet stream and go into like, the west coast of the United States. And they knew that the west coast is like tons and tons of woodlands,
Woods.
forests.
Yep.
So we're going to set the entire west coast on fire with all these balloon bombs. And there is actually footage of these balloon bombs like flying over American soil, getting shot down by pilots and stuff like that. And most of them don't even get here, but I'm sure I don't want to. Yeah, and one of them did actually go off.
Yep. Well, there was
It was a,
about 9,000 of them sent over.
yeah,
Right. They said
yeah,
only about 300 or so were ever recorded by American authorities
yeah.
to that they saw them, and only, like you said, only a few made landfall. And they only really damaged the biggest threat and damage wise from it was starting wildfires. They never really hurt.
Yeah, but then we purposely did not report the wildfires because we didn't want the Japanese to know that that's what was happening. And
Yeah.
but it does. It's like one of those interesting footnotes, a bad footnote actually in history, because the only American homeland civilian casualties of World War II happened because of those bombs. There was a family
It's a
picnicking
family.
in
Yeah.
California, and they saw it laying there, didn't know what it was, and it was like a mother, I think, like the aunt and like the kids, and like the nanny or something, and the kids ran over to it and they moved it because they didn't know what it was, and it
Yeah.
went off and it killed them all. That was the only one. That was the only like a civilian casualties.
And again,
American.
I'm jumping because that's what we do.
That's what we
I
do.
feel
Yeah.
like I tell my students all
Sacrifice.
the time that I distract myself more than anybody else
Oh,
can
I was doing
distract
that
me.
so much on Friday. Like
Me
Friday,
too. Me
I ended
too.
the
I
day.
was like,
It was,
"Ooh, fly!" Boom. Yeah, I feel so bad. So for those of you that are listening that are or have once been our students, you know.
yeah, a whole
Okay,
bunch
what
of
else you
those.
got for me?
The interesting one that I found was actually this one was actually came into place because of Churchill. Is after the fall of France, Britain's really worried. This is 1939, 1940. They're really worried about what's going to happen with Britain. Churchill vowed to set Europe ablaze. That was one of the so the secret agents came up with a bunch of these weird ways to like disguise bombs. So they would disguise bombs that look like soap, shoes, anything you could think of, and put them in suitcases. And what they figured out was basically they would take a pencil, strap a fuse to it, put some explosive on it, and then they would capture rats, and they would insert these into the rat. Okay, like you use your
Hmm.
imagination from that, and it was basically they did this to like hundreds, maybe even thousands of rats, and they would then just let these rats go like inside German held buildings in like France
Yeah.
and stuff like that, and basically they would go into like the gutters and stuff like that, and eventually the explosive would go off and it would hopefully blow up the buildings, say go blow up the boiler, stuff like that. But that was their strategy. So,
And since you're talking about deception, I feel like we definitely need to talk about the Ghost Army.
oh yeah,
Essentially, the United States hires Hollywood special effects crews, and what they do is they create blow up tanks. And by blow up, I mean like think of like when you guys go to like a carnival or something. Like they created inflatable tanks, inflatable trucks, inflatable jeeps. They created an entire inflatable army, which became known as the Ghost Army. And what they would do is they would place this army. They also had sound effects, the huge speakers with sound effects to kind of make
it's
make
when
it
they put
seem
up
like these
barracks.
tanks
Yeah,
were on. It was a
yeah.
show. It was a complete show, and they deceived the Germans so many times, actually numerous times, by creating this fake army and just placing thousands of these supposed vehicles and tanks in random places, which would force the Germans to split their army to try to counter where they thought the attack was going to come from.
Probably the biggest is they
Meanwhile,
do that in
it
D-Day,
didn't.
right? Like that's how they. That's
Yeah,
one
that's
thing
how they got
they
D-Day.
really
Yeah,
convince Hitler that they're going to attack at Calais, not Normandy, because of
yeah,
that. And they
yeah.
put
And
they put it
another
there.
thing to really make it
Well,
sink in is
they put
you have that the Ghost Army, and they even said that Patton is
Patton
going
was
to
in
be in
charge.
charge of
Yeah,
this
they put
army.
Patton in
Everyone
charge
was
of it.
afraid of Patton.
Well, Hitler,
Um,
the Germans knew Patton from North Africa,
yes,
and Patton at this point was actually suspended by Eisenhower for like slapping those soldiers in
yeah,
the
hospitals.
infirmaries in the
Yep,
hospitals, and the Germans were like, that has to be fake. There's no way you're going to not have your best general, one of your best generals, lead this invasion. This is obviously fake. So Hitler didn't believe that Patton was actually suspended during this time, which he was. He was
Yeah.
not involved in the invasion, and there was no
No.
plan of putting Patton in. They're like, no, he's too much of a wild card. That just shows like the different,
Yeah,
mindsets.
you know what? They bring him back when poop hits the fan and you have Battle of the Bulge. They're like,
Yeah,
all
when they
right,
did when you
where's
need him,
Patton?
yeah, they'll bring him back. But
Yeah, I
yeah, he
was saying
wasn't part of
before,
that.
I went
Yeah,
to Patton's museum. It's at Fort Knox. So you actually have to get into Fort Knox. You have to get like a whole day
yeah,
pass, and they have to
I'm
run
sorry
like
about
your license. I brought myself and my two sons there. It was actually a really cool museum.
that. Not bad. Yeah.
Patton. We should do something about Patton. That's a whole nother cool story.
All right, we'll have to
But
do Patton at some point. Yeah, when we start getting into some people again. Yeah.
you know what's interesting about the Ghost Army is that their story was actually kept secret until it was declassified in 1996. You know, I didn't know that. I
I
didn't
do
know
remember
that.
hearing about it, but that makes sense. Yeah, because we
That
were
makes
like,
sense.
yeah, we went once we would find out
And
about
then
it.
like PBS did like a documentary on it, the Ghost Army in 2013.
Now
But
they talk about it all the time. Like it's even in
now
like
it's yeah. But I didn't know that it was kept secret
deceptions
until
and stuff like that.
1996,
Yeah.
which is
Well,
kind of
obviously,
crazy.
yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of that stuff we have to wait till the last people are gone before it becomes declassified.
Yeah. So that was cool. All right, what else you got? I have a Porsche, the Porsche tank that Hitler tried to make. It was supposed to be the biggest tank ever. It was made by Porsche, the guy that makes, or made the Porsche even at the time. At the
That's the
time,
thing
they
with the
called the
Germans. They
Mouse.
just they always wanted to make things just bigger and
Yeah,
bigger and bigger, but they don't get the bigger things are. It's also the manpower, the resources, and then it's
yeah,
a bigger target. It's just a bigger target.
yeah. And this thing was like 200 tons. It was
Yeah.
huge.
Like yeah, it's going to wipe anything out, but how maneuverable is it going to be? What's it really going to be able to do?
Yeah, they honestly they ran out of money. It never really was created.
But yeah, a lot of those. Like I think the one I was just going to talk about was like, and maybe they found a couple of these. And if you ever see the movie Captain America: The First Avenger, they kind of show them there. It's a little more advanced than what would in real life, but obviously, but those
Hmm.
they were called the Ameribombers, right?
Hmm.
Which was basically it looked like a stealth bomber, like what we would call like the first generation stealth bombers, and they were these bombers that the Germans were building for a planned bombing raid on New York City, basically. Like they were going when they were going to
Hmm.
invade or drop bombs on New York City, that they were going to be the first transcontinental type of planes, like experimental jet engines and stuff like that, and they would fly from Germany all the way to the United States and drop the bombs there, and that was their plan. And we did find like early prototypes of them in some of these like launching pads, mountain labs, whatever you want to call it, that the Germans were doing. That obviously were stopped when the war ended, but we were on that list. The Germans still believed up until the end, at least Hitler did, and a lot of things in circle, that there was going to be some way to win this war, and that if we're going to have to bring the war to the Americans. So that was going to be one of their main things, having those long range bombers, because they didn't have those when they went into Russia. That was one of those big problems too with Russia, which we should probably do something on that too, like that failure of the Blitzkrieg in Russia at some
You know
point.
what we never do? We keep on
Like
saying when we do these podcasts, like we keep on saying what we should do, and we never write this down. And then we
we never
forget.
write down. They were like, "Oh, what should we do this next one on?" We have no
I know
idea.
we
It's like,
should do this already. So
let's just
oh,
do
should
this
listen to
one.
our
Yeah.
own podcast. That's funny.
That'd be a good idea too. Yeah.
Yeah. How about the again sticking with the Germans here? How about the curved barrel assault rifle? Did you
That's one
see
that could
that?
shoot around. That would shoot around
Corners.
corners, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We have those now. We have those
They
now.
do. They
They
actually do
pivot like a
have them
Nerf
now.
gun. They like pivot. Yeah, but this is actually a curved barrel one. Yeah, I did see those.
Yeah.
Did they actually work? I have no idea if they worked or
Well,
not.
back then, see, the thing is, they didn't make an actual gun for it. They made an attachment to the
Yeah.
gun. So oftentimes when the bullet would come out, it would like dislodge the attachment and then like blow up right on there. So it failed a lot, but the concept was definitely revived for modern weapons. I mean, it's a thing.
Again, it's a prototype. They're just throwing it out there. Field test is going to be different. See
Yep.
what it works. See
And
what
then the
doesn't
one
work.
that I remember seeing a video for, I don't know if it was one of those old documentaries about like secret weapons or something. Do you remember the Panzer drum? Panzer? I think I'm saying that right. It was this invasion weapon. It was like this big drum. I would say probably 6 feet tall in diameter, and it
Mhm.
had the like rocket. It was basically two rocket propelled wheels held together inside by a drum,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah.
drum.
Okay.
Yeah, the drum
Yes.
was filled with explosives, and the premise was that um, this was a British weapon that they would release this drum and it would go so fast because it would be propelled by these rockets that these wheels would literally make it jump on water and it would
Yeah.
just go spinning super fast, jump on water, and then get on land where it would continue up the whatever beach it is. In this case, they were trying to destroy Hitler's Atlantic Wall, eventually what we do in D-Day. And they would just crash into something and blow up. And you could see videos of this on YouTube. I mean, this thing's crazy, but
They actually
often,
used those to destroy a because it bounced on water, right?
yep.
I remember they used those to destroy if they were developed and used planned for the Olympic wall, but they also used it in a mission and it blew up. They didn't know at the time, but they blew up the hard water plant that the Germans were using, and that kind of stalled their efforts to make their atomic bomb. And I know they used that bomb, those barrel drums, on that bombing raid.
So I thought that was
To,
kind of
to blow it
interesting.
up. So you
And
see
but they
how
said
these new
often,
weapons are affecting the war, yeah.
yeah, they said well, oftentimes what used to happen is the rocket that were propelling the wheels, the rockets would disattach and just start flying,
Yeah.
and then the thing would sink.
That's what they were worried
But
about. But it actually worked in that one a few times, and one of them was when they destroyed the German hard water plant, which
yeah,
then delayed them to being able to make their own atomic bomb.
yeah,
This is one of those. It's one of those things. Well, also we're getting to with the whole idea of atomic bombs. Like we obviously weren't the only country, looking into that. Right? We knew the Germans were,
yeah.
but actually the Japanese were too. And although they were behind us as far as being able to make an actual atomic bomb, an atomic explosion, they were able to use what we would call today like a dirty bomb. It was
Hmm.
basically a conventional explosive, but that would spread radioactive fallout all over the place. And they actually planned on doing that again against New York City. And to do it, they actually created two of these. They were sent and like on convoy missions, never actually totally used. It was basically a submarine that could launch two aircraft. I'm sure you've seen this.
Yeah, the
It's one of
Japanese. Yeah, you could actually see pictures of that.
yeah, they had the
That's
pictures
all.
of them. It would surface and it could launch two seaplanes basically, and they were made. They had them, and they were going to
Yeah.
design to send them in to attack New York City, California, basically American bases, and try to. It was again, you knew this wasn't going to win the war for them. It was more of a way to get some sort of sue for peace on better terms than what they want, the terms that they wanted. Because they were going to have Americans basically infected with radiation because they knew radiation. They actually knew a bit more about radiation than we did, just because they were experimenting a lot of this stuff on like the Chinese for so many years. Like
Hmm.
what was that unit called? 731, right?
Yeah, it was.
Like those horrible, everything that the Japanese did, on the human experiment, which we should really do something on them at one point. That would be an interesting. Write that one down. Unit
Let's write that one
731.
down.
That one's going to be morbid. Like if we do that one, that one's like really.
Yeah, we're gonna have to warn our kids not to listen
Yeah,
to that.
I don't really want to. Well, I know a couple of teachers in my school. They used to do like these big units on Unit 731 and really go over some of the stuff. And then like some kids were like, "Wow!" And we at my high school we had a lot of Chinese exchange students. They would come over, and then
Mhm.
one of them actually lived kind of near that area. And they said, yeah, it's still like a major topic there. Like that people still like there's people there who are around and stuff like that. And it's something too that the Japanese a lot of times don't formally admit. Like they admit it happens, but not to that extent. It's a whole other podcast, whole other story.
Yeah.
But 731 and everything that they did there, but they knew how dangerous radiation was. So by dropping it on people, they knew it was going to be one of those things that was going to cause casualties and cause death and suffering. So
Yeah.
that was their plan.
Kind
Oh,
of
we
ran
could
out
go
of
on,
my ideas.
we can go on for this forever. Like just basically, again, these are the weapons that both sides have thrown. Some, they get thrown against the wall, seeing what sticks. So that what's going to work, what doesn't. Even the ones that don't necessarily work, then they are going to work. It's kind of like the base technology that works. I remember the first computers were made during World War II. To
Yeah.
process information, right? Break, the Enigma codes and stuff like that, and it's just one of those topics we can go on. We can go on forever.
All right. Well, I guess that kind of brings us to the end, right? Thank you for listening, everyone, and I hope you tune in again next week.
Stay safe, guys.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.
Tired of your car insurance rate going up, even with a clean driving record? You're not alone. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry compares rates side by side from over 50 top insurers and helps you switch with ease. Jerry even tracks market rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Switch with confidence. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/Libsyn today. That's JERRY.ai/LIBSYN.